And thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Force Multipliers for the PMO, Leveraging AI in Theory and Practice in combination with Prism PPM. My name is Andy Jordan. I'll be the moderator for this session, and I'll introduce our other speaker in just a moment. But before we get started, just a couple of admin things for everybody. First off, we are recording this session, so if you want to have one of your colleagues listen to it, if you want to go back and play part of it again, you'll get an email within the next few hours that tells you how to access the recording, and you'll be able to do whatever you want with that. That email will also include details of how to get a copy of the slides, so you will be able to get a copy of the slides for your further use. We will have time at the end for a few questions, so if anything that we talk about today sort of gets your brain going, please feel free to put your questions into the GoToWebinar console, and we will get to as many as we can before we get to the top of the hour. We will also have a couple of polling questions, so look out for those as we go, and I'll give you a bit more detail on that as we get to them. Finally, we will be giving away a PDU for attending this webinar, and I will give you details of how to claim that at the end of the session. So with that said, let's get straight on to a little bit more interesting stuff, and I will start by just doing the introductions. As I mentioned, my name is Andy Jordan. I'm the president of Refensing Consulting in Alberta, Canada, and I will be hosting, moderating, and contributing a little bit to this webinar. But the star of the show is Dan Marini with Prism, and the easiest thing for me to do here is to just let him introduce himself. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Really happy to be here with you today. My name is Dan Marini. I lead the sales and customer success team here at Prism PPM. I'm a former project manager myself, so I've now been working in or alongside PMOs for the past 6 years. Really excited to talk a little bit more about AI with you today, because it's something that I think is just about on everybody's radar right now, or getting more on the radar with each passing day. So thanks for the intro, Andy. I'll hand it back to you here and move along.
Thank you. It's amazing. AI has gone from like nothing to the dominant element of not just project management, but almost everything in the last few years, hasn't it? It's crazy. All right, so this is the agenda. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to go through it, and you can read it just as well as I can. But we'll first off just set a little bit of background. Then Dan will talk about the strategic AI use cases in project portfolio management. Talk a little bit about the value, the benefits, the risks, and then, as I promised, the Q&A. So before we actually get into the content, that is the first opportunity for me to launch one of the polls. So let me just launch that, and it should pop up on your screen now. And you'll see that we're asking, how are you mostly using AI in your project management today? And we give you some options for one or more standalone tools, AI integrated within your project management software, or that you're not using AI for project management right now. So give you a few seconds to read through the options, decide what is the most appropriate for you. And while everybody is voting on that, Dan, I'll pull you in and say, what do you think people are going to say? I'm guessing that we're probably not going to get 100% of people saying they're not using AI.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of I imagine we'll see a lot of standalone usage for just day-to-day efficiency, repetitive task management. I'd be really surprised to see how many folks are using it really in their core day-to-day, whether that's project management, reporting, or day-to-day execution, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But that's my guess, Andy. What about you?
Well, I'd love to sort of sound vaguely intelligent and tell you what I think, but I can actually see the answers as they come in real time. So it would be a little bit of a cheese for me to actually sort of tell you what I thought might be the most popular response when I'm actually looking at them. So, but yeah, I think you're probably not a long way off. So I see that most of you have voted. The votes are slowing down a little bit. So let me just end that and share the results with everybody. And there you go. So 2/3 of people said they're using the AI in one or more standalone tools. 23% of people, so nearly a quarter, saying they don't use AI for project management at all right now, and then 10% saying that they're using AI from within their project management software. So probably not a massive surprise there, Dan.
No.
All right, let me close that down, and you should see the slides again. So let me just start here and give you a little bit of context, and then I'll hand off to Dan. He can do all the heavy lifting on this. So if you've been involved in PMOs, or if you've been reading any of the projectmanagement.com or PMI publications in the last little while, you know that PMOs have been really shifting. They're at an inflection point, as it says here on the slide, away from that governance, oversight, reporting function into a function that is now a key critical role in strategic success of the organization. They need to be enablers of how projects achieve the benefits, how the portfolio achieves the benefits needed, not just delivering solutions. And technology has to be a key part of that. PMOs need to make sure that the technology that is being used everywhere across project delivery is actually relevant. It's going to help the organization to achieve more, to be more effective as well as efficient, and actually add value to the process, free up the people to do more work. AI is critical in that. It's not the only technology that we're talking about, but clearly AI is the dominant technological evolution that we're dealing with right now. And project management in particular, and PMOs, it's not about eliminating jobs or eliminating work. It's about freeing up project managers and team members to focus on the work that is more valuable. Get rid of that admin, get rid of the reporting, get help with the risk management elements of it, standardize the way that things operate across the organization, give support to the PMO for resource allocations and planning, that sort of stuff, so that the people can focus on actually improving the chances of success of the projects. So that's really where we need to be thinking in terms of technology and AI around PMO. So that's sort of the context for this. That's the sort of thoughts I just want to share on that. Dan, as I hand off to you, any sort of things you want to sort of add to that?
Yeah, I thought you made a few really good call outs, Andy. And one of the things I've noticed in the market is specifically as it regards AI, over the last 12 to 18 months, it's really gone from something for evaluation teams that was back of mind to a nice to have. And now in some cases, it's really become a non-negotiable in terms of tooling. And I think with that, PMOs and organizations like us, like Prism, we really need to be cognizant of not just chasing AI for the sake of AI, like you called out. It needs to be intentional. It needs to be deliberate. And I think most importantly, it needs to be purpose-built for PMOs and for the personas that are going to be leveraging it, and the different personas within a PMO. So I think that's what I would call out here. And then just moving along to the idea of where AI can sort of drive the most impact. I think that means, as I called out, sort of different things to different people, especially within a PMO, when you think about some of the different personas at play, right? A project manager wants to and should leverage AI in a different capacity than a PMO director, and furthermore, in a different capacity than, say, a CIO. The value that each one of those personas sort of extract from AI should be different, but it should be valuable. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later. So I want to move into talking about 5 really specific areas where we've seen AI become a force multiplier for PMOs, both in terms of talking to evaluating PMO teams and then talking to some of our customer base as well. And one of the things that you'll continue to kind of hear me come back to, and you called this out, Andy, is AI is never going to replace a PMO or a project manager. What we do want AI to do is sort of create that inversely proportionate relationship between the scale and the size of a PMO and the actual work that needs to be done to manage it, especially administratively. I think that right there, that idea of getting AI to work as an extension of yourself and your team is really the single biggest force multiplier. And to do that, again, you need an AI that understands your PMO. So the first kind of area or use case I want to talk through today is prioritization. And the 2 most common challenges I hear from PMO leaders, related to prioritization is, one, there's always more incoming demand than there is available capacity, right? There's never a shortage of ideas at the top of the funnel for any PMO. And the second area I hear a lot is a lot of PMOs today struggle with what we call squeaky wheel prioritization. And that's where the loudest request tends to get prioritized over requests that are sometimes more strategically valuable. And I think that sort of distinction and intersection calls out a really important portion of prioritization as a whole, which is it's always probably going to be some mix of art and science. And I think that intersection, again, is really critical in terms of how AI can fit into a PMO. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that idea of sort of balancing pure data and nuance. And what excites me when speaking with our customers and seeing how they're leveraging AI in terms of prioritization is they'll use their existing prioritization models and their scoring inside the tool. But once they have those scores generated, they'll leverage AI alongside scenario planning to really understand the implications of taking on certain projects versus backlogging them. So an example, we've got a customer in the public sector who's currently planning out their 2028 fiscal year. And they'll prompt AI with scenario-based inputs like, hey, what if we wanted to maximize our revenue impact in 2028? What if we wanted to maximize our capacity utilization in 2028? So they'll use AI alongside the planning that they're really already doing today to present, identify, and then ultimately select the optimal path forward for the organization. And I think that's really an area where artificial intelligence can provide so much strategic value and act as that extension of a PMO leader. Because if we've got a portfolio with, let's say, 50 projects and 10 different scoring criteria and some tight resourcing constraints, that is quite literally millions of possible combinations when you're planning out a certain fiscal period or next year. And that's where AI can become a force multiplier. It's not really possible for us to sit down and evaluate all those. So again, it's thinking back to how we sort of prompt AI. It might not be asking, what should I prioritize? You have scoring for that. You have ways of sort of calculating that and getting an empirical score for that. Instead, it's what scenarios should I consider for this upcoming period, and how should that impact the way that I'm having those prioritization conversations? So for that customer I mentioned, again, the foundation for their success or failure in 2028 is really happening right now. A lot of PMOs aren't necessarily planning that far out, but we all know on this call, right, that the success or failure of any given year, or even really a specific project, in large part is determined by what happens before it actually starts. Next area I want to discuss is risk management, specifically predictive risk management. And when it comes to risk management and just mitigation, a lot of times what I hear is it's not necessarily a tooling issue, right? Most PMOs, they have RAID logs, they have RAID reporting. But what I hear a lot is that the status reports that their project managers are doing, whether that's on a weekly or biweekly cadence, can oftentimes be lagging indicators, right? A lot of times I'll hear PMO leaders say, I only know about risks after they become issues. And again, it's not necessarily a tooling piece, and the challenge isn't really sort of how you're managing your RAID items and just risks, but it's really proactively identifying those when you think about risks that can come up across different project schedules with different dependencies and different resourcing constraints, and then doing that, again, more importantly, at scale. So that's where really AI's pattern recognition can come into the tool belt of PMO leaders and project managers as well, with certain prompts like, hey, let's go back and look. Are projects consistently slipping after a certain milestone? Where have actuals consistently eclipsed what we forecasted, right? So when we think about predictive risk management, a lot of that prediction is going to come from not only the underlying data, but also your postmortems, your lessons learned from similar projects that you've done over the last quarter or the last year. And predicting it is one thing, but what we're really looking for is earlier intervention. I had a PMO director tell me last month that she got a chuckle. We both got a chuckle out of this one, but she said she'd settle for being surprised 2 weeks earlier. So I kind of want to quickly just showcase a little bit of our AI and kind of how we think about sort of predictive risk management. I'll give this a prompt with, let's just say, what are the top risks that you forecast over the next month? And as this is loading, we're going to notice a few things here. One, because I'm logged in as an executive right now, we're going to see that the response is a little bit more executive laden. It's a little bit, it's meant to be a little bit more at the portfolio level. It's not going to tell me, hey, it's not going to tell me there's a task overdue and we're 2 days overdue on this task. This requires immediate attention. That's not really a portfolio risk. Instead, it's going to show me, it's going to give me an executive summary, and it's going to show me really what I need to know as an executive that is bubbling up to really the portfolio as a whole. So we can see, across certain projects or programs, any eminent scope failure. We can see either financial exposure or governance gaps, single points of failure across different resources here. And then from here, I have a list of sponsor actions that I can either immediately go ahead and action, inform my executive sponsors across different projects to maybe update. And I can also take next steps directly from this tool of saying, hey, I want to go in and enter escalate a log item, enter a log item, again, maybe ping my project sponsor for that. But the goal of this is, okay, it's an AI that knows that it's working with a PMO, it knows PPM, and it knows that the persona logged in is not just looking at a cluster of trees, right? The persona that's logged in cares about the entire forest. So when that persona asks about forecasted risks over the next month, it needs to know really that macro level. And that is really where we can start to see the difference between an AI that's purpose-built for PMOs versus more of a standalone solution. Andy, anything you'd add just to predictive risk management or RAID management as a whole and kind of the intersection of AI there?
I think you're really sort of hitting something really important with the idea of trying to predict and change behaviors as a result of this, because I see a lot of people working with risk management, starting with project management and then trying to elevate AI risk management to the portfolio or the PMO level. And it's really nothing more than give me the list of risks or assess the likelihood that this is going to occur, and it probably drives efficiency, but it doesn't drive better behaviors. And I think that's what you're identifying here that is so critical, is that we're actually able to change the future because we have a better understanding of the present. Your example of the PMO leader who says that they'd like to be surprised 2 weeks earlier, it gives you that 2-week runway to try and prevent things from getting worse or stop things from being as bad as they could otherwise be, that we just wouldn't have known about in the past. So I think that's a new way of looking at the whole concept of AI and focusing more on that effectiveness rather than efficiency, which I think is critical.
Yeah, I think, when we think about the 2-week example, right? Whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when we aggregate that across an entire portfolio, you're going to start to see some really tangible impacts on the margins, right? We're going to talk about resourcing a little bit more next, but being able to identify a resourcing bottleneck 2 weeks ahead of what you would have done, say in a current state, can end up making all the difference in terms of hygienic hiring, burnout, making sure that we're not kind of scrambling for expensive contractors retroactively, and just getting ahead of it as a whole. I think last thing I would call out here, predictive risk management, right? It's not about replacing the risk management process that a PMO is, in a lot of cases, that's a labor of love, and it's something that takes a long time to establish. It's really about enhancing the risk discovery process so we can mitigate them, again, before they become issues. All right, so as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about resource management or resource optimization. I think the bane of many PMOs' existence, right? A lot of the PMOs that I speak to and across our customer base, they're managing cross-functional resources across, in a lot of cases, different time zones. Some of those folks might do time tracking, some might not, some are supposed to and don't. And when they're forced to do this sort of manually or in a fragmented sort of tool set, it creates really huge blind spots. And as I just called out, with resource management, those blind spots tend to hit the margins as hard as really anywhere else, right? It's burnout, it's unhygienic hiring practices. That same PMO leader who I mentioned earlier was talking to us, and she said that all of her hiring requests the last 15 years have been purely anecdotal. And that really stood out to me. I think that was a really poignant line. And I think it's the unfortunate reality for a lot of PMO leaders, where they know that there is strain. They know that there is acute pressure, but it's not always easy to show that. And it's even harder to sort of manage and plan around that when it's, again, in a couple different tools, one tool, Excel docs, napkins. So it becomes an area that I think is sometimes an intimidating area to address for a lot of PMOs, but it's something that is really crucial, and hopefully it's something that AI can really help empower. When we think of best practices in this area, you really need a single pane of glass. You need to be able to see bottlenecks before they happen, and you need to be able to maintain really healthy resource capacity. And for our customers, I think, alongside things like viewing overall allocation and utilization by role and by person, leveraging scenario planning for more of the long-term implications, what AI is really helping them do, if I were to summarize it, is make fewer bad allocation decisions, right? And some of our customers will leverage prompts like, who should I staff on this project, right? How should I balance this specific role, this skill, this department accordingly? What are my lessons learned from last quarter's forecasted versus actuals, which we had just talked a little bit about, Andy, of taking the data that you have in one place, being able to really do analysis on it at scale, without having to dedicate somebody's admin time, or BAU time, keep the lights on time, over a week to sort of do that retrospective and post-mortem analysis, have the AI do it. And those sorts of outputs, and I think that, again, that sort of pattern recognition, quick aggregation of data is a really great way to eliminate those blind spots that I mentioned earlier. So this is a really big one. Resource optimization is something that tends to keep a lot of PMO leaders up at night. Andy, I'll pause, see if you have any kind of color to add here. I do have one more sort of market observation I've picked up on, but as it relates to sort of resourcing as a whole, what are your thoughts on maybe an AI best practice or how AI can sort of help at least a portion of long-term planning?
I mean, resource allocation, resource forecasting, resource planning, it's never been easy. It's always been important. I mean, I've been managing projects for, so long that I started in the last millennium. It's always been one of those things that you try and get right. But I think the one thing that we often tend to forget, and the Agile folks are particularly keen on pointing this out, is that we're dealing with people. We call it resources, which annoys a lot of Agile people because they prefer we call them people because that's what they are. But we're dealing with real issues here. When we talk about over allocation, what we're really saying is we're making people work harder than they should. We're driving them to be demotivated, disengaged, and potentially leave, and we're risking their health. But when people are underutilized, then they're getting bored and demotivated and disengaged and potentially going to be looking to leave. And this is real impacts on real people that have long-term consequences. So I think when we look at how we can use AI on this, it's easy to sort of just focus on the numbers and the technology, but we really have to consider about how we are actually treating the people that we're working with. It has long-term implications. I'm proud of the fact that some of the people that worked on teams with me back in the early 1990s, I'm still in touch with. They still talk to me. So I guess I didn't alienate them too much, right? And it has a long-term impact. I'm also sure that there's some people that never want to hear from me ever again because they're frustrated with what happened because we didn't quite get it right. And this is so important. It's a world where things are getting more crazy and going faster and changing more, and there's no way we can get it perfectly right all the time, but anything we can do to make it better makes such a critical difference. This is an area where I think AI has a massive amount of potential, Dan.
Yeah, I think the burnout piece that you called out, I think that's something that a lot of PMO leaders unfortunately can't really recognize until it's too late, just because of sometimes the tooling at their disposal, sometimes just those blind spots. And one of the most common things we hear from evaluation teams is we want to be able to do more work with the existing team that we have, right? We've got a lot of times it's teams that are really mature from a governance and structure standpoint. We've got an awesome team of project managers. They know what they're doing. We just really want to free up some of their time that is spent on, and we'll get to this in a second, but whether it's aggregating reports, chasing status updates, updating project plans, running people down, right? It's that portion of the job that is kind of the silent killer in terms of, a project manager, just a resource as a whole, total time spent throughout the week. And I think that also kind of meets at the intersection of the poll we discussed earlier, where a fair amount of folks had mentioned, hey, I use one or more standalone tools. And I would imagine that if we did an additional poll of, hey, what are you using? Why are you using AI as a standalone tool? It's probably it's eliminating some of these repetitive tasks I have to do. It's drafting me an email I can send out. It's just, allowing it to do some of that stuff that I used to do, but I would rather just, again, streamline and then spend time on where my time is more valuable. So that capacity per resource, I think there's two sides of the resourcing coin. There's the folks that are, your resource managers across your portfolio, where AI can ideally help them find those constraints, locate those bottlenecks, mitigate them accordingly. The other side, it's the end users, what we call the resource, or the Agile folks obviously call the people, where AI can just help eliminate some of that repetitive work that goes into the day in the life of a project manager, and allow them to take on more projects, do more of the stuff that they like to do, and do less of the stuff that nobody likes to do. So one of those areas we talked about was reporting. And this was something, as a former project manager, this was a huge sort of weekly and monthly time suck for me. And, aggregating reporting manually. And I think, one of the things that I struggled with, and something that I hear a lot from project managers, is there's oftentimes a gap, right, between that execution layer and that executive or strategy layer. Sometimes it's hard for a project manager or even a PMO leader. There's what they think their boss wants to see and what their boss actually wants to see, right? What a leader actually wants to see. And again, that was my reality as a PM. I always kind of struggled to get the altitude right in terms of my weekly or monthly outputs and reports, and more importantly, really make it consumable, because leaders don't really want reporting for the sake of reporting. They don't want dashboards on dashboards on dashboards. They want reporting to be able to quickly analyze, understand, and then make decisions and act, right? I was talking with an EPMO last week who said that they actually spend more time preparing executive reports than their executives spend analyzing them, which is obviously super unfortunate and suboptimal. But what we're starting to see more and more of in the market is AI becoming that really translation layer for executives. So I'm just going to jump back into the tool. I'm going to just give this sort of a broad portfolio health brief prompt here. I'm not going to go necessarily line by line as this loads up, but this is what I'll call out as something at the end. And again, it goes back to that gap that I mentioned earlier that I hear in so many PMOs. It's inputs versus outputs. It's delivery versus strategy. It's, adoption at that kind of ground layer, and it's, outputs and really strategic decision-making at the executive layer. And that relationship, which sometimes tooling can force a trade-off between, that relationship is really critical, for ensuring that your executives are making the right decisions with the right data. And AI is really the same way. We talked about sort of like the idea of garbage in, garbage out for AI, right? The outputs are only as good as the inputs. Now, what our customers, I think, have really responded positively to in terms of our AI platform, is you can see at the very bottom here, stakeholder reporting confidence. So what this is doing is really looking across the tool and understanding, how is your overall data integrity? Can you trust some of the status, the green, yellow, red status reports across your projects? Can you trust the data that ultimately you're going to be making these really strategic decisions on? We can see here that it's low, right? 7 projects show discrepancy flags. The most recent status report are between 60 and 148 days old. So it's really helpful to be able to understand, okay, not only the data that's being aggregated here and financial exposure, delivery confidence and risk, but also, can I trust that data, right? Can I trust that data to make decisions that are really going to impact not only the organization, but all the people within my organization as well? I think this is an area I wanted to call out in terms of stakeholder reporting confidence, but also it ties into that question, at a larger glance, which is overall data hygiene, right? And making sure that adoption is one thing. Change management comes in many forms, and getting adoption of a tool is critical. But you want to be able to really quantify adoption if you can. And this data hygiene dashboard, I think, does a really good job of doing just that. It's out of the box. And I think for those different personas we called out, when you're a project manager like my old self, or a PMO leader, this allows you, alongside that sort of the AI piece we talked about, prepare your talk track and not your data, right? Don't spend time creating PowerPoints and making sure that those 5 projects we just kicked off are reflecting in my custom dashboard. I want to prepare my story and my talk track rather than my actual data. And for, say, a CIO or a decision maker, this means they can really have full confidence in the decisions that they are making. And ultimately, decisions is really the whole point of reporting. So this one, again, it kind of hits home for me, because this was a huge time suck in my past life, where we were mostly PowerPoint based. It's one of those things, as soon as you drive the car off the lot, right, it starts to depreciate in value. The data is no longer real time. It's no longer live if you're presenting it next week. And you had a steering committee call earlier that week. You've got a project in your PowerPoint is red and or as green, and it should be red. You kind of that credibility hit, alongside just the man hours spent really to get that into one place. So I'm going to pause here. I got one more topic I wanted to call out. Andy, curious your thoughts, just, with your experience in terms of reporting, and from where you sit, like, what's the most valuable way for an executive to maybe interact with large amounts of portfolio data sort of at scale?
I think the key thing with reporting is to recognize that nobody cares about a report. That's just the folder that you put the information in. What matters is that information. I still remember to this day, and it's embarrassing to admit it, that as a PMO leader, we had a conversation of whether or not it was acceptable to use 2-point font in order to get a portfolio summary onto one sheet of legal, or whether we had to edit some of the content out and use 3-point font. It was a completely ridiculous conversation, but that's where we were at. What matters to decision makers, whether it's business leaders, sponsors, or project managers and their teams, is information in context, because that provides insight that allows for people to make better decisions in less time with greater confidence, and less need to correct or adjust those decisions down the road. So what you showed there with your dashboards, and the fact that you can interact with them and drill down for more details or sort of request more information, the fact that the reports are proactively providing recommendations for how to address it, it's providing background to the headline number, that is what matters to anybody involved in decision making around this, because it guides them to what to do. At the end of the day, if you're looking at a status report, it's like looking in the rearview mirror of your car. You're looking at what's happened. What you need to do is be able to leverage that to know what kind of inputs to make to change the future. And that's what the right information presented in the right way allows you to do.
Yeah. I really like that call out. And I think, what you had mentioned about reports and dashboards as a whole, I think there's a lot of solutions and tools necessarily that it is a little bit of reporting for the sake of reporting, when reporting should be for the sake of decisions. And the decisions are going to come at different layers, right? They could come at sort of any layer of that pyramid. And whether that's reporting on, hey, I'm managing 5 projects and I want to know how to compartmentalize my Monday morning. What should be top of my mind, whether that's the way I interact with that, whether that's a dashboard or whether that's AI. As a project manager, that's might be how I leverage it. As a PMO leader, it's first thing I want to do is understand the health, my PM to project ratio. How are we looking over the next 3 months? Are we healthy and on track? And then use AI again as that sort of translation layer for show me what I need to be concerned about, maybe suggest an action. Let me kind of have that conversation and just save time spent, combing through different PDFs and PowerPoints and, internal meetings that we know can drag a little bit. So
AI, I think, allows you to democratize the process as well, right? Is that in the past, reporting has always been about the information that people choose to provide you in the template. Now we're actually saying, okay, here's a tool you can interact with in order to get the information that you want, as opposed to what someone else has decided is important.
Yeah, great call. And tailoring that experience too, not only to say a blanketed persona, but also to a specific individual of, hey, when I ask AI for a portfolio health brief, here's what I want to see. I don't want to see everything. Mm-hmm. I want a quick executive summary. I want to know how, we're doing from a benefits alignment standpoint or value realization, quick financial exposure, right? Being able to kind of control the format in which you consume the data, also critical. And that goes back right to adoption and just making sure that the AI is not only meeting the PMO where it's at, but meeting the individual who's logged in and actually interacting it where they're at. Mm-hmm. Just time checking myself. I think the last area I'd like to talk through is governance. I said earlier that resource management was the bane of many PMOs' existence. Governance reviews for a lot of the folks I talk to might not be too far behind. We have a customer who compares it to going to the dentist, right? It's not fun, but you're supposed to do it. And they say, I'm supposed to do it more than I actually do. So it's also an area that just tends to be a bit of an administrative burden. And coming back to where we know AI excels, pattern recognition at scale, data analysis and aggregation. This is where AI can be a really valuable tool to sort of streamline the work around that process, especially at scale, right? It's one thing to do a governance review early days of a PMO when you've got 5 or 10 maybe projects in flight. Work gets exponentially harder as you start to scale up, both in terms of project volume and resource volume. So some of the things our customers will do today in terms of best practices for those governance reviews, go through and identify any key missing artifacts, flag any non-compliance you're seeing across a specific program, maybe validate some documentation or draft some initial governance summaries. Again, what you'll notice, and hopefully has really been one of my themes today, is the PMO ultimately makes the decision, the AI prepares the data. The goal is not to automate governance as a whole, it's to automate, again, the work around governance and then let your people get back to the work that's really driving value. So, yeah, Andy, if you've noticed a theme throughout my kind of talking points here, I hope that it's been that none of the examples that we discussed, again, are going to replace project managers or PMOs. But they do make PMOs a little bit more informed, more proactive, more efficient, or hopefully in some cases, all of the above. AI, as we all know, is really good at processing large amounts of information, identifying patterns in it, and then accelerating the analysis of it. But what it can't do, and a blind spot that I think organizations like us and of course PMOs have to be cognizant of, is it's never going to really understand organizational politics, cultural nuances, stakeholder dynamics, executive intent. And the organizations that are seeing the most success in leveraging AI are the ones sort of balancing that mix of, again, data and nuance. It should never really replace human judgment, but ideally it should empower it, right? It should empower it. And some of the areas we'd like to see it empower it, prioritization scenarios like we talked about, proactive risk identification, some resource forecasting, resources constraints, making the executive experience a little bit more streamlined and consumable. So I'm going to pause just before I kind of talk through where I've seen some organizations maybe struggle or, in their own words, outright fail with the adoption of AI. But Andy, any color or context you'd like to add, please feel free to jump in.
Yep, and just a heads up for everyone as well, we'll have another poll in just a second, so look out for that one. It's coming your way soon. I think that I've been working with PMOs for 25 years or more, and one of the consistent challenges through all that time has been the need to make decisions with incomplete or imperfect information. A lot of that is the nature of projects, and you multiply that across however many projects that a PMO is accountable for, and you add in the program layer and the portfolio layer, and then the overall goals and objectives in a world that's changing constantly. And that uncertainty is never going to go away. But we need to recognize that the best PMOs are the ones that make the most good decisions the most consistently. And the right AI, used in the right way, trained on the right data, and interacted with in a responsible manner, is going to reduce some of that uncertainty. It's not going to eliminate it. It's never going to eliminate it, but it's going to allow people to make better decisions based on a better understanding of flawed and incomplete information. There's nothing we can do to suddenly make information complete and accurate all the time. It's just not the way projects work. But if we have a better understanding of what we do know, which is what AI should give us, then we are going to improve the quality of PMOs, which by extension are going to improve the quality of the overall project and portfolio delivery, which is what it's all about, right?
Yeah, I know before you put that poll up too, Andy, I would just back you up there and saying where I see sort of AI fail might be a strong word, but where I've seen it kind of have mixed adoption success is a lot of times it's not really the AI itself. It is, as you called out, it's the data quality. It is the fact that we have incomplete and flawed data. And not only can AI be valuable, obviously, in terms of understanding what we do have, but it can also be really valuable in understanding what we don't have, alongside whether it's the sort of the hygiene dashboard that I talked about or the stakeholder reporting confidence, allowing you to be able to see, okay, here's the 70% that I can feel really good about and that we have, and that's people are being held accountable and the data is there for me to make good decisions and outputs on. But here's just as importantly, here's the 30% I don't. And here's the way that we can maybe foster that to get it to a point where, again, we can drive better decision making.
Absolutely. All right, let me throw up this next poll. And just a reminder, we are going to get to the Q&A in just a few minutes as well. So if you have any questions, please put them in. We do have some questions already, but the more difficult things I can ask Dan, the better from my standpoint. So throw some more in. All right, so just see a poll launch now. What's the top reason that you use AI today? And you see we'll give you some options there for saving time, to make better decisions. I use AI to do my job for me. I'm not sure anyone's going to admit that, even if it's true, but we'll see. And then that generous other reason, if none of those really apply. So I'll give everybody a chance to think on that one. I mean, Dan, clearly AI doesn't do your job, because I can tell that you're not an AI creation.
Don't be so sure. I've seen some of those viral videos online of the interviewers being AI. So I'll wave a hand just to just to show you I'm not. But I was gonna say, Andy, put the blindfold on, don't cheat, and let me know what you think is gonna win out here. But I think you can see the results again.
I can, and they're actually interesting. I'm going to leave it running because the numbers are switching, and the leading contenders are changing fairly rapidly. So I'm going to leave it running for a little bit more time. We've got a fair number of people voted, but a higher percentage of you voted in the first poll than have voted on this one yet. So I know it's a little bit more of a tougher question, but throw it in there. I think you might be slightly surprised. I'm certainly pleasantly surprised by what we're seeing. All right, I'm going to close it down and share the results. And there you go. So we have two dominant responses. I use AI primarily to save time, 52%. I use AI to help me make better decisions, 45%. No one said AI is doing my job, and only 2% said there was another reason. And those top two contenders were back and forth the whole way through, neck and neck for quite some time. And I don't know about you, Dan, I'm really pleasantly surprised that making better decisions is so high. I was expecting the efficiency piece, the saving time, not necessarily the effectiveness piece, to be that high.
Also pleasantly surprised. Yeah. I'd be curious too to understand, based on the results of our earlier poll question, naturally just the inputs and the prompts and what decisions some of the folks on here are maybe providing the AI with to help make those better decisions. But yeah, it's interesting. It looked like we had a photo finish at the end there too, which is always fun.
Yeah. All right. So I'll let you take it back and give some final thoughts, and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think final thoughts for me would be quality over quantity. I think the best practices that we've seen, and again, the organizations we've seen have the most success with implementing AI, have been ones that really emphasize intentionality, at least, in those early phases, right? I wouldn't necessarily recommend using it for everything. And at least initially using it for those really high value problems. When we think about like most PMOs and the PMOs that I speak with and across our customer base, I've never heard anybody say, hey, our goal in 2026 or 2027 is to become an AI powered PMO, right? It's not. The goal is to become a more effective PMO. And I think that is a really helpful framing for evaluating whether or not AI is a fit for the question at hand, right? Does this make me more effective? Does it make the PMO more effective? Does this save meaningful time, as we just saw in that poll question? And then another one we just saw in that poll question, right? Does this improve decision quality? And if the answer is no to some of those questions, I think that's a pretty good stage gate to say, okay, AI maybe is or is not the answer to that specific business challenge or that question I might have on any given day. So I think those are my final thoughts. I'll move it over to Q&A. I guess I'd just say quickly, hopefully today was a helpful framework for kind of starting to consider where AI can act as an extension of the PMO, an extension of different personas. Andy, I kind of miss our animated selves here, to be honest. But I just say, if any folks do want to continue the conversation or just compare notes, Andy and I would be more than happy to connect sort of offline or following the conversation today. So I'll pass it back to you, Andy, for some questions that might have come up throughout the way, and saved ourselves, looks like 15 minutes here at the end.
Absolutely. I have to say I'm a big fan of any AI tool that makes me look more like Stanley Tucci and less like this. So, big fan on that. All right. I'm just going to put one final poll up now while we get to the Q&A, and I will leave it up for a little while for you to consider. And all right, we do have a number of questions. So I'm going to throw this one at you first, Dan. The question's about whose decision it is to use AI or a specific AI tool, as to whether that's PMO driven or enterprise driven. And from my standpoint, I would say that there should be an overall enterprise strategy when it comes to AI, and IT and whoever is in charge of AI within the organization has to have some role in determining the tool. But the PMO has to be a critical part in deciding what makes the most sense for project environments and PMO environments, as far as I'm concerned. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's funny, throughout, I'd say, we talked about at the beginning how much the landscape and terrain has really changed over the last 15 to 18 months. A lot of the IT or IT PMOs and EPMOs that I've been speaking with, this is already, kind of the conversation has definitely already started from an enterprise level. Some have selected, a tool of choice kind of across the organization. Some are working through conversations now for, I think the purposes of the PMO specifically. That's where hopefully what we showed today too, the value of having an AI that is really purpose built for those individuals. And PMO is really unlike any other department in a company, right? It interacts with everybody, but it's its own entity, and it's fighting its own battle, certainly, on several different fronts at sometimes. So hopefully that kind of answers the question, Andy. I've seen a little bit of kind of everything, and a lot of those conversations from folks that I've been speaking with are really ongoing in a lot of ways of what is the sort of the enterprise AI strategy for the organization as a whole.
Absolutely. All right, let's get on to the next question. And this one's around unexpected responses or inappropriate responses, hallucinations, making stuff up, for those of you unfamiliar with the polite term. How do we manage that sort of thing? How do we manage the extra time that might be involved in figuring that out? How do we even potentially recognize that that might be happening if it's not always obvious? Any thoughts on how that can be handled?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I mentioned earlier, right? AI is never going to manage the PMO. It should never be in charge of managing the PMO.
Mm-hmm.
But if it can, aggregate data that certain individuals need to see at the right time, it becomes really valuable. Now, that information, I think, always, even in a non-AI setting, whether it's like a health dashboard, for instance, right? If I see a project of mine that's in red, I'm going to want to drill underneath and understand why. If I'm a PMO leader and I see a project that is way behind schedule and we have it marked as red, and I haven't maybe had a conversation with the lead PM or sponsor, I want to drill down and understand why. And I think the same really applies for the way we're going to interact with AI, right? So drilling into the underlying information and understanding, okay, that's why I'm now seeing why that single point of failure now makes sense to me, right? I've got this, project manager who's assigned to 5 different projects, and everything's kind of running way overdue. So I do think there's a level of validation that needs to be done, and the sniff test, right? But it also, I think, ties back, Andy, to what I mentioned about really making the AI, prompting the AI and setting up the sort of your agentic tooling the way that you want to interact with it. Do you want it super concise? Do you want it super comprehensive? Do you want it somewhere in between? To really standardize the way that you might go about your status reporting, your portfolio health briefs. So I think there's kind of 2 sides to that. But I would always say with any AI tool and really any sort of like valuable reporting outputs, we always want to make sure we're kind of validating and double checking the underlying data.
Mm-hmm. I think we hear a lot about AI as a team member. It's not just a piece of software. It's now a part of your virtual team or a part of your project team, PMO team, whatever it might be. And I guess with agentic AI, that's becoming even more the case. And I'm like, okay, if that's so, then let's think about how we interact with our team members. If we get something from a member of our team that doesn't seem quite right, we probe a little bit more. We ask for, a little bit of clarification. What was your process? How did you get to that? If we ask a team member to do something and the look on their face suggests they're not quite clear, then we sort of try and, does that make sense? Any questions? Try and sort of, make sure that they're comfortable with what's being asked. We don't have to be any different in that approach with AI. There is not an AI tool on the planet that won't give you some kind of response if you say, tell me what information I can provide to give me a better response. But how many people actually sort of go to that level of interaction with their tool? It's something that we have to learn how to interact with it, and we have to learn to manage the risk. When we're dealing with humans, people are going to make mistakes. It's going to be wrong. It's going to be incomplete. It's going to be misinterpreted. AI is no different in that regard, but we have ways that we manage it with people, and we need to learn those ways as they apply to AI.
That's a great call out, Andy.
Every now and then I have a moment. All right. Got a question that's come in from someone else in Canada. So, they get their question asked because, Canadian. So if you're looking for quick wins, if you're looking for the ability to drive performance, but still make it actually valuable as opposed to just quick, where should a PMO start? What would you recommend as sort of the first few use cases to explore?
I think it's got to be prescriptive. I don't think there's one answer that's necessarily right for every PMO. I think most folks, and I know PMI's done something in the past too, Andy, that sort of maturity curve. So I think it takes some introspection to start and understand where is my PMO in terms of the maturity journey. Are we closer to maybe a 1 or a 2 at the bottom of that scale and getting better? Or are we a little bit more at the upper end of that at a 4 or 5? Because I think the answer is going to really vary significantly based on where that PMO is at. I would go back to what I mentioned sort of towards the end is, when in doubt, think about quality over quantity, and think about really the biggest areas of business impact. It's one thing, oh man, my project status reports and lessons learned are such a pain in the you-know-what. I'm going to have AI do them. But I think it's another thing entirely to think about where are the downstream sort of margin-based impacts that our PMO is struggling with today, and how can I start to standardize, whether it's outputs from AI or collaboration across my team with AI to help kind of address those head on. So I do think it takes some introspection. I hope that wasn't sort of a cop-out of an answer, but it's just it's so different at different levels. And for our customers, that's one of the things we do first during implementation is understand like what's the quickest point to value that we can get you in the next X amount of time. And I think that directly ends up tying into how they leverage AI in their own platform.
I think that's actually a very good answer, because every organization is different. Every PMO is different. You can't have that one size fits all solution because it ends up not fitting anybody. You've got to start with, well, where do you need to improve? Where are you experiencing challenges? Where are you thinking that you should be able to do better? And that's going to be different, from week to week, month to month in some cases, but certainly across organizations and industries. So
absolutely.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
There's a few people have been asking different questions around the future. There's a nice easy topic with 6-7 minutes to go. So if you could get your crystal ball out, where do you think AI in PMOs is going to be 1, 3, 5, 10 years down the road? How do you see this evolving and redefining how work gets delivered?
I think one area that comes to mind for me, and there's stuff that I'm sure my brain can't even possibly comprehend yet, but I think one area that comes to mind for me, and this is always a labor of love for PMOs, is time tracking. There's so much value to be uncovered in, if you have an organization that is consistently tracking time, being able to go back and do your retrospectives and compare forecasts versus actuals. But there's the other side of the time tracking coin, where you've got folks that are not project managers, that are really, they might be engineers living in a different tool. They might be just really collaborative level individuals. And it's hard. It's probably the single hardest change management curve to climb, is getting people to consistently come in and track their time. because the average person who's maybe not in the core PMO group is like, it's an Orwellian nightmare a lot of times, right? It's here comes Big Brother. They want to know exactly what I'm doing every week, and the PMOs say, no, that is not why we're doing this at all. We want to be better informed for decisions in the future. So one of the ways that our customers have leveraged sort of the agentic AI is they're sort of that group of users, again, that is really just coming in to track time. Will come in, they have a prompt waiting for them as soon as they log into the system in the AI. Would you like to track your time? Yes, I would. Here's my time spent on these tasks across these projects. Go ahead and track it. When it's ready, press submit, approve, log out. So it's been a huge, just kind of like a streamlining and just like adoption piece for some of those customers who have struggled to get buy-in across different cross-functional teams and departments and organizations. So when I think about the future, I use that example to say there's a lot of other cross-functional teams and departments that PMOs have to engage with. And when you look to evaluate a PPM eventually, that becomes a real big sticking point. It's like, is this going to be a tool that is able to be adopted by non-classical PMs or accidental project managers like I was in a past life, and then also folks that really have limited to no interaction ever before with project management or PMOs. How can AI make their lives easier, right? That last group, because their adoption is ultimately a huge hinge point on everything we've talked about today, right? The reporting, whether it's forward or retrospective reporting, and really just drives business outcomes. So hopefully not too long-winded of a diatribe, Andy. You're used to my rambling by now, but that's where I'm curious, I guess, to see where it goes over the next year and some change.
I have no idea whether it's boring or not. I stopped listening, but yeah. So, there's one final question I'm going to squeeze in here because I think it really sort of sums up this whole, not just the AI piece, but Prism's response to it. Somebody sort of said, how is this different from a normal PPM tool? And I guess I would say to that, it isn't. It's a modern PPM tool that is now supporting the power of AI, right? I mean, what you're doing with Prism is deliberately trying to incorporate the power of AI into tools that people are already familiar with to do what they do better.
Mm-hmm. I know it's tough to ask a sales guy that question at the very end, because I'm fighting the urge to pitch right now. But obviously we are a PPM tool, and we've talked about AI kind of and how it fits within our PPM tool. If I had to answer that question holistically, I would say I think what makes Prism really unique is we're really built to address the gap that I called out a few times earlier, which is the gap between delivery and strategy, between inputs and outputs. And the way to do that is you need a tool that's adoptable for different folks, across different teams, different personas, different experience levels. But you also need a tool that's really valuable for your executives, right? Giving them the outputs they need to drive important decisions. And I think there's a couple things we looked at today and talked about that are sort of the connective tissue between those two layers. I think Prism does an exceptional job of really kind of serving as that sort of connective tissues between the execution work, the strategy up top. So yeah, I'm going to cut myself off before I do too much sales pitching, but that's what I would say, to kind of answer that question is we are a PPM tool. We're really embracing AI. A lot of our customers are embracing AI. I'm really excited to see how it continues to evolve. And that's a little bit about what makes us different. Hopefully that's one of the people who responded. Dan, give me a shout, and not Dan, I'm all set. Kick rocks on the last poll.
Yeah, I don't think that you're going to have a chance to get bored anytime soon. I think there's a few people who want to learn more about Dan. About Prism. All right, so we are almost out of time. I'm sorry, Mark, Andrea, John, others, that we didn't get to all the questions. Got to as many as we could in the time, and I did promise everybody that I would give you PDU information, so I'll do that in just a second. First off, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an awesome presentation, and I think we all learned a massive amount. So thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate that, and thank you to everybody who attended. The PDU that you can claim here will be a self-reported PDU. You don't need a code. Just go to the PMI PDU section on the website, and you can claim one PDU in the business acumen category, and that information will also be included in the email that you receive after this. That's one PDU self-reported for business acumen. All right, so we're pretty much at the top of the hour. We are pretty much out of time. So thank you, everybody, one last time. Dan, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.